For a brief moment in history, humanity managed to outrun the sound of its own scream. It was the era of faster, higher, louder. We were promised a future where New York to London took 3 hours. We were promised that the sun would never set if you flew west fast enough. It was the ultimate conquest of physics. But behind the champagne and the caviar, there was a shadow war. A war fought not with soldiers, but with blueprints, microdots, and melted rubber. Because the race to break the sound barrier wasn't just about business, it was about dominance. It was the Cold War fought at Mach 2, and like all wars, it had a body count. We think of the Concorde as a tragedy of economics, but the story of supersonic transport is actually a story of espionage, sabotage, and the terrifying price of hubris. This is the story of how we broke the sound barrier, and why the sound barrier broke us back. To understand why this machine was so dangerous, you have to understand the physics of the impossible envelope. In the 1960s, aviation engineers were facing a wall. Not a metaphorical wall, but a physical one. The sound barrier. When an object moves through air, it pushes pressure waves out in front of it. But at 767 miles per hour, the object catches up to those waves. The air cannot move out of the way fast enough. It compresses into a shock wave as hard as concrete. To punch through that wall requires brute force. But to stay there? That requires madness. At Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, the friction of the air against the fuselage is so intense that the plane cooks itself. The nose of the Concorde would reach 127 degrees Celsius. The metal skin of the aircraft would physically expand by up to 30 centimeters during flight due to thermal expansion. Engineers had to build the plane with gaps in the floorboards, or it would tear itself apart mid-air. By 1962, the British and the French had realized they couldn't afford to build this machine alone. They merged their programs to create the Concorde. It was a marriage of necessity. But in the East, Nikita Khrushchev saw this as a direct threat. If the capitalists could fly at Mach 2, the Soviet Union looked primitive. He issued a directive to the Tupolev Design Bureau. Build a supersonic transport. Build it bigger. Build it faster. And crucially, build it first. Alexei Tupolev was given a deadline that violated the laws of project management. He didn't have the time to do the R&D. He didn't have the advanced alloys. He didn't have the engine controllers. But he had one thing the British and French didn't have. He had the KGB. The West called it industrial espionage. The Soviets called it Operation Brunhilde. It was one of the most massive, coordinated intelligence-gathering operations in history. The KGB activated a network of spies across France and the UK. Their target, the Concorde blueprints. In February 1965, the head of the Paris office of Aeroflot, Sergei Pavlov, was arrested. He had been caught receiving detailed plans of the Concorde's braking system, landing gear, and airframe heat resistance profiles. But Pavlov was just the tip of the iceberg. Thousands of documents were photographed on microfilm and smuggled east. They were hidden in toothpaste tubes, hollowed-out coins, and diplomatic pouches. The result was the Tupolev Tu-144. The West laughed when they saw it. They called it the Concordski. To the untrained eye, it was a carbon copy. It had the same drooping nose, the same slender white fuselage, the same delta wing. But if you looked closer, you saw the panic. Because they had stolen the shape, but they couldn't steal the soul. The Soviets didn't have the computer controls to manage the complex wing shape of the Concorde. So, the Tu-144's wing was flatter, cruder. It didn't provide enough lift at low speeds. To fix this, Tupolev added canards, little retractable wings behind the cockpit that looked like a mustache. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound. Worse, they couldn't master the engine efficiency. The Concorde could supercruise, fly at Mach 2 without afterburners. The Tu-144 had to run its afterburners constantly just to keep up. It was a brute. Inside the cabin, it was so loud passengers had to pass notes to talk to each other. The vibration was so intense that ceiling panels reportedly fell off during test flights. But it worked. On December 31st, 1968, the Tu-144 took to the skies, 2 months before the Concorde. Moscow had won the race, or so they thought, or so they. June 3rd, 1973. The Paris Air Show. This was the Super Bowl of aviation, and for the first time, the two rivals were meeting face to face. The Concorde versus the Concordski. The rivalry was palpable. The French pilot, Jean Franchi, flew the Concorde first. He executed a flawless, graceful display. He landed to thunderous applause. The Soviet pilot, Mikhail Kozlov, sat in the cockpit of the Tu-144. He was under immense pressure. His orders from Moscow were implicit but clear. Outperform the Concorde. Do not look weak. Kozlov took off. The roar was deafening. He climbed steeply, engines spitting fire. He performed a series of maneuvers that a transport plane had no business doing. He was flying it like a fighter jet. Then, something went wrong. At 4,000 feet, Kozlov pitched the nose down violently. The plane entered a steep dive. He tried to pull out. He pulled back on the stick with everything he had. The G-forces spiked, the structure groaned, and then the left wing snapped off. The Tu-144 disintegrated. It rained fire onto the village of Goussainville. 6 crew members and 8 people on the ground were killed. The dream of Soviet supersonic supremacy died in a ball of kerosene. But why did Kozlov dive? For decades, the Soviets claimed mechanical failure. But a darker theory emerged, one that involves the French military. Reports surfaced of a secret French Mirage fighter jet that was flying too close to the Tu-144, attempting to photograph its canards. The very technology the Soviets had struggled to copy. Did Kozlov swerve to avoid a collision with the spy plane? Did the spy war literally knock the plane out of the sky? The French government denied the Mirage was there. But years later, investigators admitted the jet was in the air. The crash wasn't just an accident. It was the first casualty of the supersonic Cold War. With the Concordski grounded, the Concorde was the victor. It entered service in 1976. It was a technical marvel. It flew on the edge of space, where the sky turned a dark purple. You could see the curvature of the Earth. It was faster than the rotation of the planet. You could arrive in New York before you left London, but the victory was hollow. The Concorde had a fatal flaw that no spy could steal and no engineer could fix: physics. The sonic boom was a weapon. It shattered windows. It panicked livestock. The United States banning supersonic flight over land killed the market. The Concorde was restricted to ocean routes. Instead of hundreds of planes connecting the world, only 14 entered service. It became a boutique experience for the ultra-rich, a flying Rolex. For 24 years, it operated with an impeccable safety record. It was the safest plane in the sky. But complex systems are like a house of cards. They are stable until one card moves. And that card was moved on July 25, 2000. It was a Tuesday afternoon, Air France flight 4590. Minutes before the Concorde lined up, a Continental Airlines DC-10 took off from the same runway. A small strip of titanium alloy, a wear strip from the engine cowl, fell off the DC-10. It was 17 inches long, a piece of scrap metal. The Concorde thundered down the runway at 200 miles per hour. Its front right tire hit the metal strip. The tire didn't just puncture, it exploded. A 4.5-kilogram chunk of rubber was hurled upward like a cannonball. It hit the underside of the left wing. It didn't puncture the tank. The impact was so hard that it created a shockwave inside the fuel tank. The tank ruptured from the inside out. Fuel poured out at 100 liters per second. Sparks from the landing gear wiring ignited the vapor. The pilot, Captain Christian Marty, was already past V1, the point of no return. He couldn't stop. He had to fly. He lifted a burning plane into the air. The fire melted the wing structure. The engines failed. 2 minutes after takeoff, the Concorde crashed into a hotel in Gonesse. 113 people died. The crash grounded the fleet. But it wasn't the fire that killed the Concorde. It was the realization that the margin for error was zero. In a subsonic plane, a blown tire is an inconvenience. In a supersonic plane, where kinetic energy is squared, a blown tire is a missile. The dream was too fragile. The Concorde retired in 2003. The Tu-144 was long gone, having spent its final days carrying mail before rusting in a field near Moscow. It is the only time in human history that we have taken a technological leap forward and then voluntarily stepped back. We traded speed for efficiency. We traded the sonic boom for the lie-flat seat. Today, startups talk about bringing supersonic back. They talk about low-boom technology. But they are fighting the same ghosts that killed the Tu-144 and the Concorde. The heat, the cost, the unforgiving physics. The Cold War is over. The spies have new targets, but if you stand in a quiet field in Goussainville or Gonesse and you listen closely, you can still hear the echo. The sound of a future that came too fast, burned too bright and vanished into the silence. This is Shadow Works. Stay watching.